Hi, everybody. Welcome to this on talent in the European space sector. We will get started. I think a few more people will trickle in as we get further past 3 o'clock, but because we have a packed agenda, lots to do, we'll get started straight away. Just a quick note from me first on the agenda for the webinar. So we'll start with a very quick introduction, more as a kind of context as to why this report, and also why this report in the context of education in general, ESPI's activities, and talent for Europe, the European space sector as a whole. Then I will do a quick, so it says 15 minutes. I will try and keep it to 10 minutes so we have more time for the panel discussion, but I will go through some of the key findings that we have for our report that was just released. And then we'll move on to the main event, which will be the panel discussion. So we already have our speakers joined, so they're currently in the background. And then we will have a short Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions, we've disabled the chat for this webinar, but please put your questions in the Q&A box, and then we will have time at the end, the last 25-30 minutes, so that you can ask all your questions. For now, I will hand over to Marco Aliberti for an introduction. Marco is our Associate Manager and Lead on International Engagement here at ESPI, which means he also leads the education portfolio and all of our activities related to talent and workforce as well. So over to you, Marco.
Thank you, Laura, and good afternoon, everyone. It is really a pleasure to see such a great attendance, which is a clear proof, that what we address today is of relevance to a lot of people, an awful lot of people. And as an opening actually to this webinar, let me try maybe to put this newly released study into context, in the context of our broader activities here at ESPI. And maybe I would say that if we can go to the next slide, Laura, I don't know if I'm able to move. Yeah, thanks. As an opening, I would say maybe this new study is really at the core, of our broader mission. Our mission to promote, as you can read here, like European space policy on an international global level, to provide independent analysis and recommendations to European decision makers, like on a variety of issue areas, but also raise public awareness on strategic issues affecting the European space sectors. This mission, for those not familiar, like with our activities with ESPI, is implemented through the ESPI agenda, which is comprised of 3 main pillars. So research, which is a core, the bulk of our activities, and the study we present today is in fact, the outcome of a research activity. Engagement, with a variety of stakeholders, like from students, to the academic sector, like the think tanks, government, space agencies, and the like, on both the European front and the international arena. And education, where our purpose is to contribute to a stronger, better connected, and more efficient education ecosystem in Europe. Now, within this education portfolio, we work on 3 main lines of activities. First, we monitor trends and keep up-to-date information on the strengths or the gaps of the European space education ecosystem, with a view to provide decision makers, with mid to long-term guidance or evidence-based information that can serve to inform policy making. Second, we aim to support the development of platforms and hubs that try to connect the education world with the industry, with the workforce. And 3, we try to position ourselves as an education provider through our space policy, summer course, training schools, and fellowship programs. Now, it is in the context of this broader, I would say, education portfolio and mission that we did decide to undertake this very important study. So why is this study relevant? Next slide. Please, it's relevant simply because, and I'll tell this quickly, because we truly believe in ESPI, as you can read from our vision document, ESPI 2040, that the future of the European space sectors and its capacity to innovate, to be more competitive, and eventually at the end of the day to project power and assert Europe as a space power, ultimately relies on an education ecosystem that is able to nurture and retain also talent and a skilled workforce. Now, the problem within the European Union and Europe in general is that we are facing, in fact, a significant challenge in meeting the demand for a skilled talent in the STEM fields, not only maybe in the STEM field, but particularly within the STEM fields. And as we all know, skill shortages and recruitment problems have become quite common in most European member states since the past decades. These challenges are not exclusive, to the space domain, but have become more and more prominent within both EU and ESA member states as well, within the space sector at large. A sector that, as we all know, as we learned also from the Draghi report last year, really struggled to close its competitiveness and innovation gap. And this is also because, if not exactly because, the foundational aspects, that are related to education and talent, basically. Now, I will not go into the detail of the study. My colleague Laura will provide you with the key takeaways of the study. But maybe why is the study, what is the impact of the study? And then just like the next slide, please. I think, the report can be, as we are like here today to discuss these matters, can be an important tool to raise awareness, on the topics, challenges, but also the gaps faced by Europe at large in creating skill, talent, and a future workforce. But it's not only that. The report is also, something that we will become a tool for us to plan and structure, our future education portfolio and to inform our future educational activities. And three, we hope, and we will certainly play a proactive effort here, that the report can be used as a resource, for all stakeholders and decision makers, interested in the future of basically the talent in Europe and eventually in the future of Europe in space at large. With this, I stop and I pass the floor back to my colleague Laura, which will provide you with the key takeaways of this study. Thank you.
So with that background in mind, with the context of the study, what did we decide to do? What was the main reasoning behind the methodology was we wanted to look really at the driving forces that affect talent within the European space sector, the European space ecosystem. And we wanted to do that by looking at two perspectives, the first being industry stakeholders, so looking at what kind of jobs, for example, they're offering at the moment, what are the requirements, what kind of qualifications they need, the kind of experience levels, what are the concerns that they have in terms of recruitment, what kind of skills maybe are they lacking, and their general also recruitment practices, working conditions, the kind of conditions that they're offering young talent within the sector. And then on the other side, we really wanted to see from a student perspective, what really attracts them to the sector, maybe what concerns and perceived challenges they had to progress from maybe within their academic role as they're preparing them correctly for their future career. And then when they would like to transition to a career in the space sector, what kind of challenges or concerns they have. And then also their feedback, more general feedback on the application recruitment processes as well. And so in order to do this, we looked at three different activities. We undertook three activities, the first being a survey to students and young professionals. So I know a lot of students are on this call right now, so thank you to anyone that filled in that survey. But we really targeted students and professionals, young professionals being anyone with less than 5 years experience within the sector who were considering or actively working in the space sector in Europe. We also did this industry job monitoring exercise where we collected jobs from a spread of about 33 companies across Europe. We chose to do a subsection, a sample. Of course, we couldn't collect all of the jobs or job postings for the space sector in Europe, even though we would have liked to. We really tried to get an even spread of companies in terms of geographical location, size. So of course, we took the major players like Airbus and Thales, ESA, and we wanted to see we also wanted to make sure we had a good spread of manufacturing, upstream, downstream, all different types of companies, startups, SMEs. So this was one activity. And then the last activity was we complemented this with an industry consultation campaign via interviews and also via a survey to actually get the real perspectives from industry in terms of hiring and their perspectives there. So moving forward into the key takeaways. So this is not exhaustive of our findings. You can see those in the report, but these are kind of the ones we wanted to highlight. The first thing that really stood out to us when we were collecting the job postings for the report was this sustained demand, market demand that we saw. So we managed to collect almost 3,000 job postings across the 6-month period. And again, this was only across a sample of organizations. So really, this makes sense to us considering the space sector is growing. We know that there is increased demand for skilled talent. And what we saw was that in terms of the distribution, we had 68% were core skills. So for example, aerospace, when we talk about core space, we mean the more traditional jobs, so core space, so aerospace, systems engineering, sciences, remote sensing, and then we were looking at the enabling support roles, so business, marketing, legal, HR, IT, these types of roles. And what we saw when we looked at the need for these types of roles is that aerospace and engineering was the highest, actually on par with project management and general management roles when you combine those that are needed for core space and those for support. But we also saw that, of course, the software engineering was in the third position. And so we've started to see that, there's this need is also arising not only for the traditional space roles, but then we see these more software and data related roles as well. And what we also saw within the postings was that industry was seeming to rely quite heavily on juniors to fill these roles. So the top roles required for the internships were related to software or data. And when we were collecting these internships, there is a small caveat that within the 6 months of our collection, large industry, Thales, Airbus, and ESA released their internships within this period. So if we collected on a yearly basis, we would probably expect, for example, in this graph related to the data science, modeling, and analytics jobs, that in fact, we would probably have some higher data from the junior, mid-level, executive, and senior. And apprenticeships. Another finding that was really clear to us was this mid-level bottleneck. So within all of the postings, over 40% of jobs were looking for people in the mid-level, with juniors not even reaching about 20% of the distribution. And this was a finding that really resonated with us within the because students told us that their top concerns for finding a job in the space sector were related to lack of opportunities and high competition. And of course, if you have a lack of opportunity, then this will cause high competition. They also gave us some data on how they felt about academic programs. And so you can see that only 22% of the students and professionals we asked felt that their academic programs were preparing them correctly, or they were providing appropriate routes into the space sector. And we provided just a small sample of some of the comments that we received about why they felt this way. And so most of the comments could be split into two categories. So either they were concerned with the quantity of academic programs, so there was not enough mid-level training courses or specific space courses in their area, in their geographical area, or the quality of space programs, so maybe related to a lack of opportunities to gain work experience, to gain hands-on work experience of working in the space sector, and so on. But now if I move on to a bit more happy, being the inspirational part of the space sector, what we found, and this also it's good to see that this is continuing from our last reports that we released in 2022, was that in terms of motivations to join the space sector, inspiration remains the key motivator for pursuing a career in the space sector. So 96% of respondents to our survey mentioned that that one of the main reasons is because they're heavily inspired by the sector. And this inspiration is carried by a fascination for space exploration, space science, and technology. So those were the top 3 inspirators for the sector. And what we also found was these people that are highly inspired by technology, science, and exploration seem to be the most loyal to the space sector. They were the least likely to consider moving to another sector. And they also were looking for the lowest, or they were expecting the lowest salaries, implying that they have this intrinsic motivation when it comes with this fascination for these topics. However, a result that we also found is that this fascination seems to shift as students progress into their early careers. So they start off with this high, it seems, fascination for exploration, science, technology. And then as they progress into their early careers and they gain more experience, this fascination seems to shift towards more, let's say, Earth-related applications of space. So diplomacy, international cooperation, climate, and so on. And I think the last slide that I have in the key findings is we also wanted to see how open and flexible the space sector is to other profiles. And this we primarily did looking at the job postings, but we also had we also consulted industry to get their views on this. And what we found was that over 70% of the job postings we collected did not specify that they needed a space background to work in the sector. Of course, this was slightly different depending on the job. Of course, there's some you would expect that people would need experience. Also, this was slightly different based on seniority level. So generally, they expected more experience from more senior hires, of course, and less from less junior hires. But one thing that really stood out to us in the interviews was that the industry interviews was that it seems that industry does acknowledge the value of these profiles, not from the space sector to work in the sector, but that there seems to be a problem in breaking the space bubble of being able to convince these profiles to work in the space sector, to raise awareness that their skills in other sectors are actually transversal to the space sector. So I'm going to leave it there so that we can move on to the panel section. So I'll move to the next slide, and hopefully, Sophie, we can bring all of our panelists onto the screen with me. Thank you. Okay. Perfect. So I think I see everybody. So firstly, thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. It really is great. I think this report in particular, we really wanted a diverse perspective because it affects so many different stakeholders within Europe. Not, as we said, we focused on industry and students, so luckily we have the perspectives of both. But our study also affects HR professionals. So we have Lucy from ESA. It affects academia because we need to progress in our space programs in order to solve this issue. And we also need fellow members of think tanks such as Joseph from the UK, who's doing really similar work, actually inspired a lot of what we're doing. So I'm going to do quick introductions and then we can get started. So first we have Jerome Barbier, who is a representative from YES, the Young European Enterprise Finland, Jerome's coordinator for YES. We have Joseph Dudley, co-director of Space Skills Alliance, which is a think tank consultancy and backbone organization addressing space skill shortages in the UK. We have Professor Chris Rapley, Professor of Climate Science from UCL, also Chair of the European Science Foundation's European Space Sciences Committee, also a member of the Science Museum Science Advisory Board, and much more I know that you do, Chris, so forgive me for shortening a little bit. We have Lucy van der Tas, who is Head of Talent Acquisition at ESA, Jose Pedro Ferreira, who is representing Space Generation Advisory Council, SGAC, as Project Group's Coordinator, and we have Stijn de Neve, who is a recent student of Advanced Master's Studies in Space Science from KU Leuven, and a Master's degree in Chemistry from Ghent University, so representing our student perspective. So thank you everyone for joining. I first wanted to start actually with you, Joseph, because as I said, one of the main things that we've seen is that we have this mid-level bottleneck, and this is something that you've done a lot of work on in the UK, and it's something that you see is really similar. And so because you have some great data on this, and I think you've even progressed a lot further than we have in terms of why this mid-level bottleneck is the case, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what you've observed in the UK in relation to this and why this seems to be the case.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Laura. So yes, this is something that we found. We did a study in 2023 in partnership with the UK Space Agency, where we surveyed companies in the UK and asked them about their skills challenges and their recruitment difficulties and so on. And we found that particularly they had this challenge at the mid-level, and that actually at the junior level, they were often kind of overwhelmed with demand. And I think that tallies with the data that you're seeing about the experiences of students and so on. And that sort of makes sense because we see that a lot of young people who are interested in space, and I was one not that long ago, they are interested in space, and so they study essentially one of two subjects. They study physics or they study aerospace engineering, because those are the two things that when you think about space, those are the two subjects. So you study those, and everybody's doing the same thing and applying for the same small number of space jobs that fit really neatly with that. Now, your data also shows that actually an area where there's a lot of internships is the data side of things. And those students are in very, very high demand, and they're not really thinking about space. They're thinking about, can I go and work for a big tech company? Can I do something interesting with AI? So we've got a lot of young people competing for certain roles, and the companies don't really need to search for those. But when you are looking then at the mid-level, you are needing people with a bit of experience, which means that they need to have been there for a little while. They need to have had that progression pathway. And because the sector is growing quite fast, you end up with actually there just aren't enough people who have had 5 years experience, because 5 years ago the sector was much smaller, so there were just fewer people, and so you're having to bring in people from elsewhere. And as your research has noted, that need for prior experience in the sector is greater when it's at a mid or a senior level. And so all of these factors combine that you end up with more challenges there. You've also got that salary is a bigger issue when you're further along in your career. By that point, you might have bought a house, you might have a family. These are all things where you're no longer able to just go, I love space, I'm going to do whatever, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't pay me very much, because actually you're thinking, well, I've got to pay my mortgage, I've got to look after my kids and so on. And that job over there in the tech sector pays a lot more, so I'm going to go over there. So we lose people that way as well. So there's a lot of factors at play here that really squeeze that middle and mean that we see a lot of kind of poaching between companies.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that was, as you said, also something we noticed. I mean, there seems to be just so many things contributing to this mid-level bottleneck. Maybe I'll go to you next, Lucy. From ESA, I know you've spoken in the past about having this retirement wave, or we have this kind of aging generation within the space sector. In some cases, not in all cases, but in ESA, it seems to be the case where this is really happening to you. So I'm wondering, is this already a reality that you're seeing this really high need then for mid-level people because people are retiring? How are you trying to that problem? Is it about making sure that you share this from the senior level, junior level? Is it about more like training the juniors to progress to the high level, or how do you see this?
Well, thank you. Yes, in the short answer, yes, we have a high need for mid-level profiles, but we have always had a high need for mid-level profiles, and I expect we may very well always continue to have this need. If you think that the starting role at ESA is with 5+ years of experience, but very often for the engineering roles, it is 10. So it could even be up to that number of years of experience. Typically, ESA roles require industrial experience. It's very well valued at ESA, and often prior experience in the space sector. That doesn't mean that the spin-in from other sectors is not valued. The battery sector, for instance, there's a lot of spin-in from the automotive sector. We've had spin-in from the railway sector as well. But being where we are located with the projects that we run with the money that we're given by the member states, there is a sense of responsibility, and that we need to have people who can speak the same language as the industrial counterparts that they will be working with. But we place a lot of value on feeding the talent pipeline, not just for us, but also for the European sector as a whole through the entry-level programs. We have internships, we offer internships, we host up to about 300 a year. We have the graduate trainee program where we host around 100. Now, these are small numbers in terms of other companies in the space sector as a whole, but we also have a junior professional program, which is relatively new. It's small numbers moving forward, 15 positions a year, but we will be focusing on the really key competencies among that. But as I said, I don't think that this high need is necessarily specific to the retirement wave. It's made it a little bit more crucial at this point in time, but we're about halfway through. And as I said, it will continue. And I don't know if it's useful to know, but the average age at ESA is currently 46.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. And maybe then at this point, I will also go to Jerome from the industry side, really for your thoughts. Based on this discussion, we've now seen the perspective in the UK, we see the perspective at ESA. How do you see this? So you work, of course, for the young industry, so we're talking more about startups as opposed to established space sector. But do you see any of this kind of mid-level bottleneck, or are there other, in terms of hiring, are there other issues that you face, or like, specific skill needs, things like that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura. So maybe first to clarify, the young is a bit confusing. We're quite aware of that. But yes, it's a relatively new gathering of companies that actually scale ups. So we are like the big startups, I would say, in space, and the ones that already have an HR mass, usually above 100 employees. We don't really see for us and for our members this mid-level bottleneck because we're actually the one that attract the mid-level profiles, either from government or for big groups. So usually they are people that entered the market at junior level position, either in big companies or in government or in think tanks and academia, and join mid-level careers. Scale-ups, precisely because we usually offer competitive salaries, including compared to established giants in the space sector. But they also find some attractiveness considering let's say, the innovation part, like less the space sector per se, but the idea that the scale-up, so things are moving quite fast. They can see in those companies things happening in 2 or 3 years, like for a small short amount of time before going back either in the big industry or going at ESA or going in other organizations, things that they would need to spend 10 years in other companies to see.
Thank you, Jerome. And are there specific skills that you that you have a high need for, would you say, within industry? I mean, within the yes are working really to try and increase the type of, or that you see a gap in the type of profiles that you're trying to achieve?
We don't have very much like a need of profile in a precise sector because basically we are growing quite fast in every part of it. So usually we have a very fair amount of representation among the different skills necessary in the company.
Okay, perfect. So maybe then I'll switch a little bit to talk about the academic programs and also introduce you, Chris, in this respect. So something, of course, that came up a lot in our survey was the need to, in order to continue having the talent that we need. So Lucy gave the example of an ESA, Joseph as well, with increasing the demand for software, data, skills, and so on. The space sector is not just traditional roles anymore. It needs a wide variety of skills. And part of that, of course, will come within our academic programs. So I'm wondering, in your case, how do you see us being able to grow academic programs? Because it's harder than it seems, right? It's not just as simple we can, we need to just increase the amount of academic programs we have, or we need to tailor it one way or another. But actually, it's quite complicated. So I was hoping to get your thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, just to a little bit of background, I started in space in 1970 at UCL Small Earth Space Science Lab. And the experience there was that at the time, there were about 120 people worked there. And the scientific researchers, instrument developers, and instrument analysts were in the same building as the engineers and the people who manufactured the instruments. And what became really clear there was that space is very demanding. You might have hundreds of systems, all of which have got to work perfectly, but they've got to work together. And so it's the place where you need the ultimate silo busting capacity. You need people to be able to speak the same language, understand each other, empathize with each other. And it was about that time that NASA and others started talking about the T-shaped person. So somebody who can bring something to the party. They have a deep skill which they can apply. So that's the vertical bar, but the horizontal bar is the capacity to see where that talent can play its major role and to work within a team so that the sum is greater than the parts. And that level of empathy is something in large organizations that one constantly has to work against. Organizations tend to crystallize out into silos. So space is the most demanding in my experience in this respect. So how do you generate people who have got that talent and that insight? And we heard earlier from Joseph that the source of talent tends to be physicists or engineers. I'm a climate scientist, so it also tends to be geographers and others. And getting people with those backgrounds to be able to understand each other, speak the same language, understand the different ways that they think is quite difficult. Early on in the 80s and 90s, I was involved with UCL and Imperial setting up a master's course to try and help physicists and geographers who were finding it difficult to get jobs to up their attractiveness to the European space industry. And that was really difficult because the physicists found the mathematics in that course too simple and the geographers found it too hard. So there are some fundamental problems there, which have been exacerbated these days as free education in universities, particularly in the UK, have become something of the past, and universities have become businesses with business models. So the example I can give is that in UCL now, to introduce a new master's course, which might be tailored to try and overcome these silo issues, produce your T-shaped people who have talents in a particular area but can apply them widely. It's 2 to 3 years to get a course approved, but you have to battle against the incumbents because UCL won't permit a new course to be accredited unless another course drops out, and that new course has got to demonstrate its business model that it will attract a greater income, and the existing incumbents will fight it. So how to overcome that? Well, it seems to me that the way is to take existing courses and see if one can insert modules within those, which would allow us to try and feed this type of person into the industry. Essentially, what I'm saying is this is a difficult problem for the universities to deal with, and it's a difficult problem more generally because you're trying to train people with a particular worldview and talent.
So it's sort of about having people with that. They keep with their expertise. Let's say it's aerospace engineering, physics, but then they're growing more competencies. So that's the T-shape that you were talking about. Correct. They have this kind of well-rounded, broad overview of what's needed to work in the space sector.
If you have somebody who's brilliant at a very narrow discipline but can't see the big picture, they're not much use to you. And if you've got a generalist who can see what the problem is but can't bring anything to the party, then they're not much use to you either. You need people who are curious, driven, capable, and wanting to solve problems. Many university courses don't provide that sort of background and insight.
Okay. And so maybe to complement that, I'll introduce Cien. So you're a recent master's graduate of space science, or master's degree in space science from KU Leuven, and master's degree in chemistry. So maybe you could complement this with your experience of your academic degree, because I assume the master's in space science, it's more interdisciplinary, or it should be more interdisciplinary. So mostly interested in how you feel that you are prepared to enter the space sector. And also maybe your perspectives on, because I understand that you're currently looking for a job, and maybe some of your concerns or difficulties or positive parts of looking for a job in the space sector.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for having me. So first of all, yeah, I have a chemistry degree, and this is my first master's degree. And then afterwards, I did a master in space studies, and it's an interdisciplinary master. So people from many different backgrounds can enter into the academic master degree. We really get a broad view over the whole space sector. So we have courses like space law, space business, space policy, but also science courses, so life sciences and like space exploration, but also some engineering courses. So we really are prepared for like the whole space sector. We get input also from a lot of companies, and we can do also a lot of networking. So we go to a lot of events so that we really understand how the space sector is organized, and who are the big players also, and how we can eventually maybe find a job, because we already know a lot of companies that work in the sector. So for me at the moment, I'm still searching for a job, and I also heard of my colleagues that also graduated that they also find difficulties. And for me, and also what they thought, it was more because they really do need people with some experience, and the opportunities to gain this type of experience are very limited, especially for people that don't have a engineering background, because of course engineering is one of the main roles needed in the space sector. And so what I also find is, or what I think, because I'm definitely not an expert on this, but people will then maybe go to other sectors to get those experience, and then afterwards maybe return. But I feel like you risk losing a potential workforce to the space sector, because people will settle in other sectors and maybe don't find it that easy to go back to the space sector afterwards. So yeah, that's my view on the situation at the moment.
Thank you. And I'm wondering, is there something in particular right now you could say that you feel would have helped you in this search? I mean, would it be more opportunities for internships, work experience? Would that help within an academic program, in your opinion, or is it?
I feel like maybe more opportunities. I don't know if more academic opportunities would help, because like the master that I did already, I feel like it's already a good way to prepare yourself for the space sector. But it's I don't know if companies really like, I don't know if they really see this master degree as an advantage, because you still need to have a proper background to be able to apply for a certain position. So I feel like maybe just more positions for people that have an entry level background.
So it's not just the academic programs, it's what comes afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Jose, I'm also interested in your perspective here, because you're representing SGC, Space Generation Advisory Council, the youth perspective. As project groups coordinator, I know you work with a lot of volunteers, young people who are very inspired by the space sector. I'm wondering if, number one, if what Sienna says resonates with you and your experience. But then I'm also interested more generally, I think, in SGC. We have this huge volunteer organization of young people who are interested in space. And I'm wondering, how much of that do you think is a kind of inspiration, that they really are excited by the topic, and how much do you think is they're concerned about finding a job in the space sector and working, being able to go to SJC helps them to increase their skills, network, make connections, already have sort of a bridge into the space sector. So please, over to you for your thoughts.
Of course. Thank you, Laura. So just for context, the Space Generation Advisory Council is, as you mentioned, this large organization for young professionals, and I would say early career professionals aged from 18 to 35 years old. So we actually work with a broad range of experiences and profiles first and foremost. And I would say that the people I've had the pleasure to work with, especially within the project groups branch of SGAC, which is a more research-oriented, let's say, more focused on these hard skills of how to develop a technical project, on how to do research on the aerospace sector. These actually fit in two big sort of profiles. We have the recent graduates or the master's students that want to essentially gain some more knowledge on specific areas that probably not that much covered by their programs. And you have these almost, we can even say mid-career professionals that were in adjacent areas of knowledge, but that now want to pivot into the aerospace sector. And this is, I believe, where the inspirational part from your question comes in. These are people that have developed their skill set. This second group of people that develop a very broad skill set, but that now want to follow their passion, and they resort to the project groups in the case that we're speaking about, to essentially develop those skills and to dive into the aerospace sector with a bit more detail. So I feel that we feel this gap between academia and essentially these early stage positions within the industry, wherein we allow our members to develop the skill set they may need while applying to the jobs they want. Now, this may prompt us to a question of whether or not there is this need for post-graduation or even mid-career training currently in industry positions or post-academia. And I believe that this is exactly where we fit. This is exactly where SGAC fits as a volunteering organization to give the floor, to provide the opportunity and the structure for our members to develop the skills.
Okay, so kind of what I got there was there's two reasons. One, that they haven't got all the skills they need from their masters, maybe it's disciplinary, or that they have done something completely non-space related and they want to find a job in the space sector. I'm wondering, from your view, do you see something in particular? I mean, the skills not covered. Profiles that currently have a non-space background. Do you see? I mean, do you think there should be more academic programs addressing this kind of transferal in Europe from this non-space background to the space sector? Is it enough that they get this experience from SJC, for example? Or how in your experience, how much extra knowledge do people need?
That's a very interesting question. I would say that the skill sets, and then essentially focusing on your question about these people that transition from a different industry to aerospace, the skill set is there. Essentially, it's just a matter of essentially integrating yourself in a new industry with essentially new jargon, new habits, and essentially the network, as you mentioned in your first introduction. And that's where also SGC comes in, is essentially to make sure that we know each other, and then the opportunities, essentially there is this flux of information and opportunities amongst us. So I would say that that the skill set is pretty much transferable, but then it needs to be applied and to essentially to develop this level of proficiency within the field. It takes time, and SGC would come in as the platform to try it out first before actually venture yourself into the actual industry, into the actual real world, so quote unquote.
Makes sense. Thanks, Jose. We definitely have a lot of jargon in the space sector. So then we mentioned, I mean, inspiration a lot. We were also mentioning earlier the various skills gap. So I want to shift maybe a little bit towards this inspiration, attracting youth to the space sector, but also this issue of competition with other sectors that was mentioned already by Lucy, also by, I think, Joseph and Cien. So we have this skills gap for certain skills that you mentioned, Joseph, software and data, but then we also have, as you said, these other big tech companies that they come in and they're offering maybe better salaries, they're offering better benefits. What would stop somebody with a data science degree working for a big company like Google or Facebook rather than working in the space sector? And maybe that's the inspirational aspect of the space sector. That's something that we definitely are exploring at ESPI. But I'm very interested in your thoughts. Maybe I'll start with Lucy. How do we make sure that we're getting the profiles that we need to solve the skills gap? So talking more about software, new skills, AI, data analytics, and making sure that we can making sure the space sector is attractive for them, and making sure we can keep these profiles long term, not just for junior graduate programs, but throughout their careers.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to add quantum and cybersecurity to the AI software data, because these are also very important disciplines. And we must not forget the more classic engineering space domains: mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, RF systems, structures, thermal mechanisms. We're going to, as far as I know, the information I have is we're not moving away from those, and that is the backbone of the space industry. So we mustn't forget them with all these new competencies and skills that we are needing as we're becoming increasingly digital. So it's very important, but these are also very important. I'd also like to say one other thing about aerospace engineering. Aerospace engineering is maybe, as Chris was talking about, T-shaped skills. It's the horizontal bar of the T-shaped skills. We need the vertical as well. And Cien, it was very interesting, your perspective on the studies that you have done, but you would need to have a bit more to move into an engineering role. There are a lot of other roles in industrial policy, in international relations, and all that sort of area where your sort of profile is very much needed, and certainly at the start of your career. So I think that that's very useful. Preparing to help people, we need to do more to identify the skills and to, how can I say, identify critical profiles across the whole of Europe. One of our biggest challenges is finding is some of our key profiles are located in 1 or 2 member states and not across the whole of Europe. So we would be so I'll give you a couple of examples: optical engineering, primarily for Germany and France, RF systems, primarily Italy and Spain. It's not that they're not in other domains, but they are there as well. So at the start of a career, I think it would be good to work together with academia to identify the current and future skills gaps. Also perhaps cooperate in co-developing curricula and related content, getting involved in knowledge transfer, and coming back to what Chris was saying, looking at the possibility to enroll in modules from a wide range of potential universities. And this is something that ESA is already looking at, which we hope to be able to develop further. For the future and retaining people, retention is not necessarily an issue for us in terms of the inspirational side, the passionate, the contribution. We're doing something for the overall space sector. So it was interesting to see how people's motivation for joining the space sector evolves over the years. But I think there's also a fundamental factor in giving back. And that, I think, is if the space sector can continue by emphasizing how ubiquitous space is now in our daily lives. We can't live without space. So you would be giving back to the community and to the European community.
Thank you, Lucy. Maybe Chris, similar question to you. Maybe also from more the academic side, the science side, or just in general, like we make sure that the sector remains attractive.
Well, one of the, I mean, I until quite recently was still overseeing and teaching students, and it's been quite interesting to see how the current age we're in is so different from my own experience and others, you know, decades ago. So the expectation of many young people in academia at present is not what it used to be, that you could, if provided you delivered, you could be fairly confident that you would have a career path that lasted, you know, many decades, even through to retirement. So many young people these days have no expectation that they'll necessarily still be in the field in 3 years' time, or 5 years' time, maybe. And so they're looking for a level of return of satisfaction, which is different. It used to be that there was a sort of assumption that you had to earn your way as an expert, you know, the vertical part of the T-bar, working within a team to deliver stuff before you looked at how that would impact and benefit society. And I'm particularly thinking of climate change. Whereas what I'm finding with students these days is that they're very keen to see that whatever they're doing over the next 2 to 3 years has a tangible benefit to society. So that they're looking for a more complex mix than was originally the case. So when people say, well, yes, space inspires people, and of course it does, one of the problems with traditional space, and particularly ESA space, is that projects have very long gestation times. I mean, we can be talking about 10. I know people who've worked essentially on the same project for more or less their entire career, and some have even been disappointed to have to retire before the damn thing has been launched. Now, startups and new space, of course, are much more dynamic, and from that respect may be more attractive. But it does seem to me, and of course, I sit on all I have been sitting on all 3 of ESA science advisory committees, and ESA is very sensitive to this and is trying to find ways to ensure that job satisfaction is delivered incrementally throughout projects. But it does seem to me that that's a key issue for young people, that if they think they're going to have to wait for 10 years or more before they see some tangible outcome, then they will probably shift somewhere else. Can I just pick up one other thing as well? And that is, there's something to do with bravery. My experience has been that there used to be an old joke that you know, the most people in the academic community, if you looked at their careers, they'd spent 50 years polishing their PhD. What I've seen is that people who are brave enough to make a big shift from one specialism to another, and to find an organization that is brave enough to accept them, you need both to fit together. For an academic, there may be a dip in their publications for a while, but after that, things really take off, because they will bring with them knowledge and experience from one domain, which is probably not known in the other domain, and it cross-fertilizes in a way which is beneficial to everybody. So those are two pieces of the chemistry that one needs to get right to draw people in the way that we're trying to.
Thank you, Chris. I like that idea of bravery. It's very true. Joseph, maybe a final remark on this from your side, from the UK perspective. Same question. Do you see, I mean, what are your thoughts on making maybe specifically the UK space sector as attractive as possible? Considering, I mean, are there any things, any steps in place currently to kind of solve this issue of people being poached by other sectors that are maybe more attractive, and to draw people back to the space sector?
Yeah, so we've got to look at, you know, the wide range of things that motivate people to choose to apply to a job and to stay in that job, right? Money is the most obvious one, but it's not necessarily the most important, depending on, you know, who you are, what motivates you, what stage of life you're in, and so on. As I've already mentioned, those motivations change over time, and I think you found this in some of your research as well, about, you know, what people found the most exciting was a bit different at different stages of their life. And part of that is you're aging and you're changing, but also part of that is generational, that, you know, millennials have a different opinion to Gen X and so on. So, you know, we need to look at salaries, and we need to look at the fact that a lot of salaries in the space sector are not competitive with the tech sector, and probably never can be, right? When we're looking at salaries in the hundreds of thousands range offered by American companies, particularly AI companies and so on, space is unlikely to ever be able to compete with that, and therefore it's sort of not worth it. So then you've got to look at, well, what are the non-salary things, right? So things like flexible working are increasingly valued by young people, but also, you know, are very important for working parents. So when we look at, you know, how do we bring in people who have historically not had access to these sorts of sectors? So, you know, working parents, people who are returning from taking parental leave and so on, there are lots of things there that are going to be valuable to them that are not just salaries. Then, as you know, Chris and Lucy have picked up on, you've got what's the bigger narrative that we're fitting into, right? And space was a really, really exciting thing in, you know, the 60s, the 70s, a little bit into the 80s. And then it stopped being cool because we weren't sending people to the moon anymore. You know, we weren't doing anything very exciting. And then more recently, it's kind of come back into vogue, and you can see that in media. So, you know, it's not just the fact that in the UK we've had Tim Peake, which was you know, a big deal, but you just have to look at, there are more Star Trek shows now than there were before. There are more Star Wars shows. You know, there is this greater interest now in space. And as much as I suspect many of us are not his biggest fan, I think Elon Musk has to be given some credit here, because actually he has been one of the people who has articulated quite an exciting vision. You know, he wants to go to Mars. Now, whether or not that's feasible, and whether living on Mars is going to be a thing, he's captured the imagination. SpaceX has done incredible things on a technological front, which have totally changed the nature of the space sector. Got loads of interest from government, but also from companies. You know, we've got constellations of satellites. We've got all sorts of things that weren't possible before, and that has really unlocked a whole new vision and got people excited about space again. You know, now we're seeing the kinds of conversations that we were hearing, you know, 60 years ago, of people actually being excited about space. When you associate with Elon Musk, people get pretty upset about it. But when you associate with things like, okay, it allows us to monitor the climate, it allows us to, you know, do a whole lot of things that we weren't able to do before, people do get quite interested in it. And it's very important, I think, to emphasize those links, so that we're not just saying astronauts and billionaires. We're talking about, these are the benefits to life on Earth, to you, like this is what it's going to enable in the future, while keeping that exciting, what if we did live on Mars, you know? Because I think that does make people excited to be like, oh, maybe I could be part of you know, the next step of human civilization. even if it's actually 200 years away.
So my next question actually was going to be related to what you just said, and I think it's a question I'll leave it open to whoever would like to answer it, but it's based on this finding that we have, which is that people as they progress from being a student to early career, that they seem to be less inspired then by exploration in science technology and more inspired by, as you said, Joseph, these like more concrete applications on Earth, climate, maybe international cooperation, diplomacy, etc. So I'm wondering, is this a good thing? That actually we do see this shift? Does it mean that we need to highlight this shift more for the students and the younger generation, less about exploration and or is it, as I suspect, maybe a good mix of both, that you continue to have obviously the inspirational, as you said, this good narrative, Joseph, that Elon is very good at providing, but also this down to earth, this is actually physically what the space sector can do for Earth? Open question, if anybody would like to.
I'll have a go if you like.
Go on, Chris. Yes.
Okay. The inspiration. You often hear, oh, the general public isn't interested in science, and people aren't interested in science. My experience is it's just how you tell the story. And if you talk to anybody, your next door neighbor, I've seen young people talking to them about what they're doing in science, and the most common response is, "Oh my goodness, you are so lucky. You are so lucky to be doing something so interesting and out of the normal." I mean, it's a fact that there was a poll a few years ago that asked people in the UK, how many of you know of a living or dead, can you name a living scientist? Can you name a dead scientist? Have you ever met a scientist? And the majority of people have never met a scientist. They don't know what motivates scientists. They don't understand it. But when they do, they get very enthusiastic. So telling the story in a way that attracts and inspires people is the first thing. I have to say that 20, 30 years ago, more, I was, as an experimenter who built instruments to fly in space, quite negative about humans in space, because the costs, the risks, all the rest of it are so stupendous that side of space tends to nibble away pretty effectively at the sort of budgets that we were looking for. What I've come to realize over the last decade or so, going to Starmus events, is that the celebrity of humans in space, the human story of somebody in space, is something that cuts right through. And so despite the fact that it makes it very expensive, it makes it very risky, I think that if the politicians never want to come and stand and have their photograph next to me, they always want to go and stand next to Tim Peake or whoever. And in the end, it's the politicians who decide how much support space gets and the public behind them. So I think this meld of the celebrity, the kind of inspiration that humans confronting the new frontier, that narrative is a very powerful one, and we need to push that very hard. Sorry, I may have gone off track a little bit there, but I hope you get what I'm saying.
Yes, and no, it's just, yes, no, it's great to hear your perspective. So running to the end of the panel at this stage, I also want to leave time for the Q&A. So I have one question for each panelist, maybe 1 minute, 1.5 minutes each, which is basically just a look to the future for the space sector in Europe. I suppose one question I would have would be, in your perspectives, what is the most maybe important, or if you had the most important topic to be addressed? Or, where do you see, how can we evolve in the best way going forward for all stakeholders, let's say? Maybe I'll start with Lucy.
Thank you. Sure. For me, it's more a question of accessing perhaps potentially latent talent pools. First of all, is encouraging more people to go into STEM. And not because I think you have to go into STEM and that should be your career choice. If your career choice lies elsewhere, why not? But I think too many people do not go into STEM because they don't understand what it means, what the impact is, and actually how it could be of a benefit to them. So that's the first point. The second one is women. We know that the rate of graduation in STEM subjects across the EU is roughly 50-50, yet only 23% of the people working in the European space sector today are women. And I would like to know a bit more, why are people not staying? We know that people staying in STEM after graduation drops, and then it drops again when they move into the space sector. I'd like to know why. And we need to work more at encouraging people to look at STEM. Also continue talking about it, what Chris said. Our open days, we're running a series of open days this month. The open day in Spain last weekend, they had 2,500 tickets. They went in 6 minutes. They had a waiting list of 10,000. This weekend, we have the open days here in the Netherlands. We have, I think, 12,000 tickets gone already. Last year, 8,500 people came. So the interest is there, but we need to continue talking about it, building on it, and making sure as many people as possible know what it can bring for them.
Thank you, Lucy. Jerome, I'll go to you next.
Yes, thank you very much. So I think, and building on what was mentioned several times, including when it comes to academic program or other things, a general trend is that the space has for very long been considered as like a very specific independent sector in the industry and in the global public affairs, and it's now finally reunited with the global market. And so the main trend, which I think is very positive, at least from an industry perspective, is that more and more we'll need people who understand that being a space specialist means to be someone with a space focus in a more general set of skills, whether it's in STEM, in engineering, public affairs, sales and commercial activities. And this is quite sound. And this is also the sort of profile that we see are more and more needed in the industry. So I think this hybridization shall be taken into account either by academic programs, by companies, it's already the case, but also by institutions when it comes to promoting space specialty and space activity.
Thank you. Jose?
Yeah, I wanted to bring some remarks, but more onto the evolution of the workforce skill set. And I wanted essentially to talk about the elephant in the room in this era of artificial intelligence. I feel that there is this critical need for essentially for juniors, as you described in your study, Laura, to think strategically about what lies ahead and not just be prompt engineers. This is something that we are only now seeing the rise from. And you also seen in your results that these IT skills are geared towards more the junior population, at least in applicants, internships, and so forth, not only on the core space, but also on support roles, as you mentioned. So I understand that this capacity of not only of thinking strategically once again. And this entails a little bit into creativity. And I feel that's where the aerospace sector is still very attractive from. It's still a very fast-paced industry, a very highly innovative industry, wherein the turnaround times is, for example, much different than, for example, in aeronautics. And I feel that that's still what attracts people, folks like me and others that venture into this sector, and that's also what brings the inspirational factor. People, as Chris mentioned, when we talk with the scientists and we realize what they're doing, and we realize that they're probably freer in their capacity of envisioning their probably work path, their current workload. That's what I believe also inspires people and attracts into the aerospace sector. So, summarizing, in this AI era, trying to still foment creativity, even though this is a very broad statement, I believe that this is critical in what lies ahead for the workforce evolution.
You can say, Cian, over to you.
Okay, I will maybe just give a tip for students and recent graduates like me, because it resonates best with me also. So I would just say, when you're looking for a job or opportunities, like really contact people, organizations, like send them messages on LinkedIn or emails, because I feel like we have this saying in Dutch and it goes, een nee heb je, een ja kan je krijgen. And it basically means if you don't ask, the answer will always be no. So you never know if you'll get opportunities. You will never know if there are positions or if they remember you for later on, and you will get opportunities. So I think that's the message I will give to like the students and the recent graduates.
Very true. Thank you. And Chris, you're the next on my screen.
Yeah, I'd like to just introduce one more thought. The cohort of talent that is retiring joined space maybe 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. I mean, I'm one of them. And the knowledge and experience that is stored in their heads is very difficult to deliver through documents. Well, in 1970, when I joined MSSL, I was given a little document called Tips for Experimenters, NASA one, and it was about 15 pages long, and it says, you know, don't use cadmium, and you know, the point is that that knowledge is being lost unless we introduce something like apprenticeships or mentorships, so that people coming into the industry, into the game, into the domain, can work with people who say to them, oh no, that won't work. We tried that in whenever it was, and there's a good reason why that doesn't work. So I think what we're missing here is how to extract as effectively as we can that enormous talent which is draining away, because the people who are joining the space domain now are being asked to work on missions which are tens or hundreds of times more complex than the cohort that joined 30 or 40 years ago, and to get up to speed quickly to be able to deliver flawlessly, because space, as I say, is very unforgiving. You know, you get one thing wrong and a €1 billion project can fail. So that's my last thought. You know, how can we find ways of connecting that existing store of knowledge with the new people who are coming in, because they'll find it fun. It's fun working with people who really know stuff.
It's a very interesting thought. Yeah, and to have maybe mentorship program or something to connect that great wealth of knowledge. And final thoughts from you, Joseph.
So in terms of, you know, what I think the sector should do, I've published a roadmap looking particularly at the UK space sector, and you can have a look at that, and you know, that I think chimes with a lot of the things that we talked about here. But I'm going to take this opportunity to, rather than repeat that to you, talk about something a little bit different, which is the more that I've worked on this issue within the space sector, the more that I have realized that space is not that special. You know, we are having the same conversations that people are having in the tech sector, in the rail sector, in renewables, in quantum, in everywhere, right? Because STEM, it keeps growing. The STEM skills issue becomes bigger and bigger. And all of the things that we are talking about are relatively minor changes. You know, we want to get some more people into STEM. We want to, you know, fix the gender balance and so on. But actually, these are relatively small changes. And personally, I'm going to throw this gray out there in the last couple of minutes of this session. I think we need to radically rethink our approach to education. Chris mentioned that it takes 3 years to set up a new course at UCL, and you'll be fighting all the way. Now, 3 years ago, in October 2022, ChatGPT didn't exist.
Yeah.
So you think about what has happened in the last 3 years. It didn't get launched till November. So 3 years, and now all we can talk about is AI. And every single one of us on this panel and in this audience has used AI, and it's totally, you know, it's changing the way that they work. It's in every single app that you want to use. Every website's pushing it at you. So you think that's just 3 years, and the course that Chris proposed 3 years ago, is it still going to be relevant now? You know, that is a system that was designed in the 19th century, and did a fantastic job of bringing us, you know, the Industrial Revolution and all sorts of other things. But is it still fit for purpose today? Is the concept of degree courses where you have to spend a long time planning them and then a long time doing them, and then you end up in work that's changed massively since when you actually started, is that still fit for purpose, especially for a sector like tech that is evolving? Now, I know that's a huge question. It's a scary thing. I don't know how to solve it. Personally, I think it looks a bit more like, you know, more on the job learning, the sorts of things that Chris was mentioning, apprenticeships, mentoring, rather than I'm going to book learn everything for 3 or 4 years. I'm going to do a couple of masters. I'm going to do a PhD, and then the whole sector's changed. But that would be a kind of seismic shift in the way that we do things. But I think that that's the sort of thing that we have to think about if we are going to solve this problem that does not just affect space, but affects all STEM sectors all over the world.
Thank you, Joseph. I think it's a really good way to end the panel, to be honest, left with this big question. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes forward, especially if you have thoughts on it in the UK. I mean, definitely agree with everything you've said there. We definitely need a change with how we think about education, especially for the space sector, well, technology sectors, you know, that are, as you said, are fast evolving. So we've already run over a little bit of time, so I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Sophie, who will run the Q&A session. So Sophie, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everybody. My name is Sophie. Just also to the people that are watching, if you have any more questions, as a little reminder, feel free to post them in the chat now. About our first question, that is touching up on something we talked about earlier with the requirement a lot of times of having a master's degree, so that a lot of young and mid-career professionals don't have one, and also because in the UK, for a lot of sectors, master's degree are not a requirement, but at European organizations and ESA, a lot of times there are a minimum. So the question is there scope for changing this to allow those with professional experience to apply for roles even without master's degree? Maybe if anybody wants to take that, they can. If not, maybe I would hand it to Lucy, if that would be okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, because I hear the word ESA mentioned. I think having grown up in the UK, that we have to also look, there's a fundamental difference in the academic approach and attitudes in continental Europe to the Anglo-Saxon countries. In continental Europe, master's degrees carry much, much more weight. And I had noticed a trend in the UK to an increased number of students going on to do their masters. We have to see whether the latest changes in the education funding and things like that, what impact that has. But in a nutshell, I do not see ESA changing its approach in the near future. We are able to attract and recruit the people with the master's degrees that we need. It may take us a bit more work, but we do get there. But we also have to remember that ESA is working in close partnership with European industry, not just British industry, and they have to be able to speak at the same level with their peers in these sectors. So I hope that answers the question, but in a nutshell, I don't see this changing, certainly not for ESA in the near future.
Perfect, thank you. Any add-ons or?
I would just add that I completely agree that we by saying, oh, you've got to have a master's, we really constrain the number of people who can do things. And personally, I'd like to see a shift away from you must have these qualifications and much more towards you must have these skills, which you may have got through the qualifications, but you may have got through doing something in another sector, through working, you know, there are all sorts of different routes to achieve the same objective.
Thank you. The next question. So in spite of intrinsic motivation, how does the space sector intend on letting in non-STEM talents, for instance, policy or commercial, into the fields without sidelining them to just the support roles of the space sector? Is there anybody who has a answer? If not, maybe I would give this one to Jerome, if that's okay.
Well, happy to jump in, especially being a policy person originally. I was before at the Foreign Affairs in France and then in international organizations. So my first answer would be that the implicit in the question is that support function are less important than the one building the product. If you mean that, I mean, at the end of the day, most of the core space industry is working with products or activities that require STEM and engineering background. So the part of the policy or the commercial directions here are to elevate and support this activity, but they have a core role also in the companies, if you think of that. Like the companies that are working there are not just in support system, they are handling the strategy, they are helping the different actors, including in the product section, to build and to answer the actual market, the requirements of the different clients that are especially from governments, because it's a sector that relies on government spending. So it's not just support mission per se, if you just mean that they would be sideline, let's say, in the strategy and the core part of the activity of the company. But at the end of the day, yes, this is a sector that relies highly on technical products. And so the idea is that those commercial persons are relying on this expertise and are going to sell and to defend the interest of the technical product towards the different clients and also the different commitment for regulatory activities.
Perfect. Thank you. Would anybody else like to add something to that? Okay. We will move on then. Our next question is regarding the impact of the shift towards defense of the European space ecosystem and its job market. What your expectations are on that? Is there anybody who has an answer available?
I would say that the Earth observation science community is very nervous of this, because there's only, if the cake is only a certain size, given the rather tricky geopolitical circumstances that we're living in, there is a worry that the emphasis on science as the underlying backbone, which ESA has developed its program on for 50 years, may begin to be undermined by a shift towards defense, which as a European citizen, I'm very sympathetic towards. I think we need a greater integration. So ESA's long history has always been, its original charter says that it's a civilian organization. And so this slight blurring of the boundary between what ESA does and Europe's interest in using space for defense needs to be navigated rather carefully. But the Copernicus example is a good one, and that seems to be the track that we're on. And so if that works out well, I suspect it will draw even more people into the sector than currently, because there will be people who will be motivated by delivering a increased defense capability to society. So so I'm saying it's potentially positive, but it's a little dangerous. It has to be navigated well.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is regarding how we talked about that many passionate young engineers and scientists in Europe struggle to find early career opportunities, whereas, as we said, mid-level experts are high in demand. But for those more competitive salaries and innovative projects that might be offered abroad and not in Europe. So the question is, how do you think the European space industry can better motivate and retain talented people who are deeply committed to the sector but feel pushed to look elsewhere, both early and mid-career? Maybe Jose, do you have an answer for that?
Well, I'd like to chime in and bring at least the point of view. I mean, especially speaking about Europe, and I would say that even though it's very competitive and the whole the whole transition to tech bubble, as Joseph mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to compete with tech salaries right now. But essentially, the non-job related or the non-work, the non-salary related portion of it, it's something that at least people of my generation, the juniors, as described in the study, are very sensitive to. And I would say that also picking back on what Lucy mentioned on how to give back, framing this appropriately, so that this new pool of talent relates more with the current goals from Europe, the current struggles, and feel as part of a mission to not only give back but also contribute towards a greater future. As Chris was mentioning, this defense pivoting is something that needs to be navigated carefully. There is a dual use potential here between Earth observation and defense applications of this Earth observation data. So it's in my point of view, it's all about very carefully framing these new opportunities and speaking the language of the juniors, so that they are motivated to stay and not just go after the monetary goal, which is a very low hanging fruit in a lot of ways. But I would say that space still speaks to our interests and keeps us motivating in that capacity. We just need to be able to attract and to retain this talent in Europe.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is for Chris. Ian writes, I had a Telespazio in the UK. We are currently using Experis Academy Emma Lucas on a program which brings people from outside the sector and upskills them into a dedicated area such as SATCOM. Chris, what would be your view on this being a great way to transition and share the knowledge we are losing?
Yeah, yes. The more that we can attract people who bring new skills, new ideas, new experiences into the sector, the better. Because the fact that they're motivated to do that tells you that they're already a T-shaped person. That is, they're bringing some skill and they're interested in applying it in a new context. So it seems to me that that's perfect. That fertilizes the domain in a way which is satisfying to the individuals involved, and also benefits the sector more generally, and hopefully it satisfies Lucy's concern about diversity as well, because maybe we can, bring in more women, more ethnic diversity from other sectors to fertilize the system in a way that all of us feel that it is necessary. So I see that as entirely positive.
Great, thank you. For the next question, we have, in shaping future talent, we are nurturing explorers, people who question, create, and take risks, or primarily training role fillers. What kind of mindset do organizations and companies actually need to thrive in today's evolving space industry?
Maybe I'll comment on that one. I think we need both, right? If the world was full of explorers and risk takers, nothing would get done. And if the world is filled with, people who do really good admin, but don't, look beyond that, then we'd never invent anything new. And I think we have a tendency to talk about, these are the specific things that everybody needs to have. And actually, we need a mix, as I'm sure all of us are familiar with in our friendship groups, in our workplaces, and so on. You need that mix. If we are, really overemphasizing one side of things, then we have a bit of a problem. And so we need that mix. And we see that in what industry is asking for. Sometimes they just want somebody who can, as you put it, fill a role. So have, a particular useful set of skills, and they can go and they can do that, and they sort of fit into a greater machine. And other times they need somebody who is, coming in and innovating and thinking about completely new ways of doing it, and replacing the machine with a brand new machine. So I don't think it's just one or the other, and it's very difficult to kind of boil down to industry just needs this thing. So industry needs everything. Different roles and different organizations require different skill sets.
Could I just add something? Could I just add something to that? I've seen it in Darmstadt when a mission switches on. We've seen it in SpaceX when they capture a booster in their pincers. It's the entire staff of the organization that are jumping around hugging each other, because they feel that they have all contributed, and they have all contributed to that success. And if I might just say so, I sit on lots of committees, and I judge committees on the degree of laughter, because if you hear laughter, you know that you've got smart people who have come to respect each other and understand each other and figure out what their roles are and to work together and are comfortable with that and enjoying the activity. Some committees I sit on are horrible because there's an awful silence and it says there are tensions and discontent. So what we're all looking for in any sector, but particularly in the space sector, and it happens in the space sector because when you get a launch, when you get a success, the joy erupts. And at that point, it doesn't matter whether you're the typist or the administrator or the director or the engineer. Everybody feels that it's a joint accomplishment, and that's a terrific benefit for the space sector because it has those magical moments.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is talking about how we highlighted numerous times the motivation through inspiration, which often is driven by exploration or human spaceflight. So do you think in this sense that space agencies have an intrinsic advantage over the private sector in terms of attracting applications? And in that regard also, how can we ensure that space agencies also leave some talent for startups and small and medium-sized enterprises, especially in the context of today's limited pool? That's a loaded question. I don't know if Lucy,
shall I jump in and take that one?
Sure.
Yes. Well, I think, yes, working for an organization like the European Space Agency, we have a certain advantage. We're a very attractive employer. But I would like to say that working at an organization like ESA is not for everybody. The type of person who likes to work in startups and SMEs, you want minimum bureaucracy, minimum admin, and you want to get down to the nitty-gritty and deliver for your customer. And if you work for an agency, you're working with public money, there are checks and balances, there is administration, there is bureaucracy. It's not for everybody. So it's back to what Joseph was saying earlier about the space industry needs everything. There is room in the space industry as well for different types of personalities and different types of needs.
Perfect, thank you. Do we also want a perspective from the industry side on this, or?
Happy to jump in indeed, because I fully aligned with what Lucy just said, and reversely, basically all of the HR talking my members doing the same thing, is that they pose right from the interview, like what they call the deal, which means to say, like, if you want to be in your line of work, if you want stability, including with your private life, it may not be the best place to work, like in a startup or a scale-up, because it's going to move, because it's young entities that are still trying to figure out what they are doing exactly, etc. So there are clearly different profiles, but what is important, I think, to say for the space sector is that there is a place for everybody. You can work in an agency, you can work as a large corporation that is here since 50 years, you can work in a startup. It's very different experiences each time, and everyone can find its own interest in that.
Great, thank you. And then I would say the last question for today is just, it's a question regarding opportunities for international applicants. Max wondering what the opportunities are for him while he's still in the process of obtaining a passport for an EU member state. Are there any tips and tricks? Of course, before somebody answers that, I do have to say that ESPI would be a great opportunity. But are there any other thoughts on this?
Well, I would also, no, please.
Joseph. No, you go.
No, I was aside from the shameless self-promotion as well, I would also say that SGAC is a good place to start. I mean, we are by definition almost a decentralized worldwide network of volunteers that work together towards the same goal. And you are free to define that goal by choosing the project you jump into, but definitely would recommend checking out what we do, and happy to be of further assistance.
Great.
Could I?
Yeah, of course.
I'd just like to finish. It's an opportunity to say I think ESA is an extraordinary gem. If ESA didn't exist and you walked into a room and said, "Hey guys, gals, I've got this great idea. Why don't we get 23 sovereign nations to work together to deliver the most technically and scientifically demanding kit you can imagine, in the most difficult circumstances you can imagine, you'd be laughed out of the room. But ESA is a huge success. And from a global perspective, it's one of the few examples where 23 sovereign nations have pooled their interests in a constructive way for the collective good. And in a world which is heading in many places in the opposite direction of division, it's an example of what humanity can achieve. And it does seem to me that even if people working in the industry don't completely crystallize that idea, they understand that this is a collaborative exercise where everybody plays their role, and the satisfaction of doing that is something that's very deep and profound. So for me, that dream, that vision, the European dream, if you like, is something that ESA really exemplifies. And I think that's one of its major attractors that will draw people in, as long as ESA continues.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We're gonna conclude the Q&A because we're running out of time. So I'm gonna hand back over to Laura at this point. And yeah, thank you so much.
So thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Really last remarks from me. Apologies, I need to go back to the end of my slides. So I really hope that everybody watching got something out of this webinar. I really learned a lot, and it was really great to hear the individual perspectives. Very excited to work also more on this, especially, as you said, Joseph, on completely overhauling educational curricula. But last notice is that if you're interested in attending any ESPI events, the next one is our autumn conference in Vienna at the end of October, and our registrations are closing next week, so you have to be quick, basically, to be able to come. But that will be also very interesting, more on the space power component of Europe. So with that, I wanted to say thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Thank you so much again to the panelists for sharing your time with us. And if you have any further questions on talent or of anything that you heard today, please feel free to get in touch. So thank you, everybody. We'll leave it there.